Good evening and welcome to Mishnah Mastery! Fantastic. Lovely to have you all on board. Welcome to everyone watching live on Zoom. We are going to dive straight in, guys. We're going to be doing chapter 2 of Moed Katan, hopefully chapter 3 of Moed Katan, and if we're really lucky, chapter 1 of Chagigah as well. Let's see how we go. We do have the rabbinic power hour tonight, so we might only do 2 chapters, but you never know your luck. So here we go. Let's get it up on the screen and let's get underway with chapter 2 of Moed Katan, which is talking about more things to do with working over Chol HaMoed and what is a person allowed to do in order to avoid financial loss. So that's what we are talking about in chapter 2. So, says the Mishnah in Mishnah 1 of chapter 2, Perek Beis, Mishnah Aleph. So, olive pickers would pick unripe olives and would put them into a vat to finish ripening them before they would come to press them. So, obviously, they are not wanting their olives to go bad, and you would turn them over to help them get fully ripe, but you've got to be careful because there is elements of this process which would be considered quite strenuous work. So the Mishnah says, Mishahafach es zeisav, somebody who has turned over his olives to be able to get them fully ripe before coming to press them. Ve'er or evel or ones. Sorry, is this talking about? Yes, it is talking about Chol HaMoed. Ve'er or evel or ones. And unfortunately for him, he lost a close relative. Or ones, or something unavoidable happened to him, or shehituhu poalim, or his workers, it says here, misled them, but I've got in my notes here that he'd hired workers and they never showed up. So he was unable to get the work done before the Chag. He was unable to get his olives pressed before Yom Tov started. So the Mishnah says, Toin Korah Rishona Umanicha La'achar HaMoed. He can load up the first beam. He can load the beam and it can do its initial press, and whatever comes out of it will come out of it. So he can leave it like that until after the festival. So the Mishnah is acknowledging 2 things. Number 1, it's a big tircha to get involved with pressing oil, but there is a certain level of loss that the Mishnah is trying to avoid. So the Mishnah says that you are allowed to leave the beam in place, and whatever drips out will drip out. And that is the opinion of Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says that once you've started, you can finish. I've started, so I'll finish. Zolef v'gomer v'gaf kadarko. He can press the olives and he can complete the process, and he can plug the barrels of oil that he manages to make. He can seal them up in the normal way. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi with regards to olives. And now in Mishnah Beis, we are going to have the same conversation about processing wine. Now, with wine, there is less potential for loss than with olives, unless, of course, you're worried that they are going to ferment. So says the Mishnah, V'chein mishahaya yeno b'toch habor. If somebody has wine in a pit, ve'ero evel or ones, and so he is now needing to mourn for a close relative, or something unavoidable happened to him, or shehituhu poalim, or his workers have misled him, have let him down, then, says Rabbi Yossi, Zolef v'gomer v'gav kadarka, you can nonetheless finish the process. And that is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda says, Oseh lo limudim b'shvil shelo yachmitz. He says that there's really not much potential for loss with regards to yain. It's not going to spoil if you leave the grapes in place throughout that period of time. And so you can put some boards over it just to make sure that it doesn't ferment. But beyond that, you would not be able to do anything, says Rabbi Yehuda. Is this the Purim special? Mm-hmm. Okay, you're recording. There's millions of people on YouTube watching you. Okay.
I know.
They will be absolutely terrified.
Well, they didn't see that I got
Okay, so says the Mishnah in Mishnah Gimel. Situations where you can do the full job in order to avoid potential loss. So says the Mishnah, Machnis Adam Peirosav Mipnei Aganavim. You can bring in your fruit from the field during Chol Moed if you are afraid of thieves. V'shole pishtano min mishra, and you can take out the flax from the soaking pool bishvil shelot avad, in order that they should not be spoiled. So you can lay them out to dry, which would be the normal part of the flax creating process. You can do that because to leave them in the water throughout the whole of Chag is going to be a problem. Uvilvad, as long as, says the Mishnah, as long as it's not your intention, as long as your main reason is not so that you can kind of just do labor and do malacha on Chol Moed. It has to be a certain element of appropriate mindset when you do these things. The chulan in kivnu malachtam b'moed yovedu. And for all of these things, if you are planning ahead of time to do this work over Chol Moed, then you're not really allowed to do it, and your vedu and your fruits of your labor will just have to be lost. The idea is that something is happening to you to stop you from doing these jobs before Yom Tov, before Chol Moed, and so if you are left in a dire situation, then there are ways of fixing it. But if you're planning to do this work over Chol Moed, then the Mishnah says, sorry bud, you're just going to have to let it all go to waste. Mishnah Dalet, what kind of commercial business may you do? So fundamentally, if you need it for Chol Moed, then you can do it. So the Mishnah says, Ein loikhin batim, we do not buy houses. Avadim, we do not buy slaves. Uvahema, and we do not buy animals. Ela letzorech hamoed, unless of course you need these things for the festival. Or letzorech hamocher, or maybe you need to be able to give some money to the seller because the seller doesn't have any money to buy food. She'ein lo ma yochel, he doesn't have enough food to eat. So in that case, the person could buy anything, even if he doesn't need it for Chol Moed. If the seller needs it, then you're allowed to buy it, if that seller indeed has not got enough money for his own Yom Tov. The rest of the types of work in this Mishnah are things which are forbidden because they're just too much exertion. So the Mishnah says, you cannot empty furniture from one house to another. But you could move your possessions to a courtyard if that was necessary. And you can't bring home things that are at a craftsman's workshop, for example. If they have, if you've sent off a bunch of chairs to be, restuffed or something like that. So you can't go and collect those things and bring them home. But if you are concerned about them, then you can move them to another courtyard. You can move them to a safe place where they are going to be protected and not run the risk of any loss or damage. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Hay. You are allowed during Chol Moed to spread your figs out. Figs that would normally be spread out to dry in the sun. The Mishnah says you can cover these dried up figs with straw if you are concerned that they are going to get damaged from rain or from dew. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af ma'abin, you could even cover them with a thick covering. In my notes on the screen here, you may even condense the figs. The point is that Rabbi Yehuda is very lenient because the figs are definitely at risk if you're going to leave them exposed during the whole period of Chol Moed. And so Rabbi Yehuda says you can even go one step further and do whatever it takes to cover these figs over. Mochrei Peiros, when it comes to selling produce, kusus v'chelim, or selling clothing and utensils, the Mishnah says mochrim b'tzina, you can sell them in private, letzorech hamoed, as long as you are selling them for things that are needed during the festival. So it could be that you only open one door to your shop, or you open shorter hours, but you do it in a slightly more private, concealed way than just kind of full-blown opening up your shop for the whole of Chol Moed. Hatsayadim, when it comes to people who trap, fish, that's why it says fishermen. V'hadashoshos, people who chop wheat, or groats makers, as it says on the screen there. V'hagorosos, and bean grinders. Osin b'tzina letzorech hamoed. They can do their work, again, also b'tzina, in this kind of more private way, if it's for the sake of the festival. Rabbi Yossi says, Heim hechmiru atzman. They would be stringent upon themselves to refrain from this work for the whole of Chol HaMoed, even if it was things that might be needed. But if they didn't need to, then they would be very strict on themselves. And that, ladies and gentlemen, helps us complete chapter 2 of Maseches Moed Katan. So mazel tov, everybody, on completing chapter 2. And let's dive straight in. Thumbs up. Well done, Gary. Let's dive straight in then with Perek Gimel, with chapter 3, our final Perek of Moed Katan, which is going to be starting off by talking about the basic prohibition. Well, not the basic prohibition, but there is a basic prohibition against laundry, doing laundry, washing clothes, and having haircuts during Chol HaMoed, because really these things should be done before Yom Tov. And so we want to encourage people to do them before Yom Tov. And so really you're not supposed to do those things during Chol HaMoed. But Mishnah Aleph is going to share with us the people who may get haircuts on Chol HaMoed because they were unable to do it before Yom Tov started. Says the Mishnah, Ve'elu megalchin b'moed. These are the people who may get haircuts during Chol HaMoed. The Mishnah continues, Habam Medinas Hayam, someone who returns from an overseas journey, even if they got back before Yom Tov, they didn't have the time to get their hair cut before Yom Tov, they may do so during Chol HaMoed. Umebeis Hashivya, someone who is freed from a non-Jewish jail, he is freed from captivity. V'hayotze mibeis ha'asurim, someone who is freed from a Jewish prison. V'hamaludeh, somebody who has been cut off, someone who has been excommunicated, ostracized, and therefore is not supposed to get a haircut or wash their clothes. But let's say they get reinstated during Chol HaMoed. Let's say their cancel culture gets reversed during Chol HaMoed. Says the Mishnah, the sages cancel their cancel culture of this particular individual. So too, someone who had sworn that they would not get a haircut, and then they go to a chacham, they go to a sage to have that neder, to have that vow cancelled. Vahanazir, somebody who ends his period of Nazarism. Vahamatsora, somebody who finishes his time frame of being a Matsora. And specifically, Vahamatsora ha'ole mitumasala tarasa, specifically this Matsora who is coming up, changing his status from being impure to being pure. So all of these people can get haircuts during Chol HaMoed because they were unable to before Yom Tov started. Mishnah Beis deals with those who can do washing. So this is a similar list for laundry, but with a few exceptions. It says the Mishnah, these are the people who may do laundry, can wash their clothes during Chol HaMoed. Habam Medinas Hayam, someone returning from overseas. Umibeis Hashivya, from a non-Jewish prison. Vayotze mibeis ha'asurim, from a Jewish prison. Somebody who was excommunicated and is now being welcomed back into the community. Somebody who had sworn that he was not going to wash clothes and then had that oath cancelled by the rabbis, he is going to be allowed to wash his clothing. Mitpachos hayadayim, when it comes to hand towels, and umitpachot hasaparim, when it comes to barbers' towels. Now, even though barbers are not supposed to be giving haircuts, since there are people who are allowed to get haircuts, there must also, by inference, be barbers who are giving haircuts. So these hand towels and these barbers' towels, which are needed to be washed, they need to be able to keep these towels clean. Umitpachos hasfag, body towels are, towels that we use to dry ourselves with, because these things are in regular usage and may need to be washed. So the Mishnah says these things can be washed. Continues the Mishnah, Zavin, Hazavin v'Hazavos v'Nidos v'Hayoldos. People who have been suffering from a Zav discharge, or women who have been suffering from a Ziva discharge, or a menstruating woman, or a woman who has just given birth, or someone who is changing status from impure to pure. All these people are going to be permitted to wash whatever's needed to be able to purify themselves. But all other people who are not included in the category in Mishnah Beis for washing clothes, or in the category for cutting hair in Mishnah Aleph, all of these people are going to be prohibited from doing those things during Chol Moed. Now, Mishnah Gimel, by way of introduction, I think we mentioned last week that it's prohibited to write in a professional manner. So a scribe is not supposed to write during Chol Moed. So what our Mishnah is going to be telling us about are the things that are allowed to be written, because we need to be able to keep a record of these things. So ve'elu kosmin b'moed, these are the things that are allowed to be written by a professional, skilled writer, scribe. So these are the things that can be written on Chol Moed. Says the Mishnah, Kiddushay Nashim, the engagement document. So it's not talking about a kasubah, but it's talking about the a record of people getting engaged. Gittin, divorce documents. V'shovarim, which are loan repayment receipts. So if someone pays back a loan, so it needs to be officially documented, at least back in the day, and so that can be written during Chol Moed. Diatiki are translated as deeds of gift. Or another way of saying this would be a dying man's will. So if a person is close to death and wishes to have a will drafted, written during Chol Moed, he may do so, because it's very important that that is recorded. Matana ufruzbulin. When it comes to matana is translated on the screen as deeds of gift. My apologies. So deeds of gift, upruzbulin, and documents which are going to confirm that someone who has lent money, and the year of Shavuos, the 7th year of the cycle, is going to be happening during the time and the terms of that loan, in order to protect the lender from losing his money during Shavuos, during Shemitah, because all loans get cancelled. So the rabbis instituted a pruzbul, which empowers the court to collect loans after Shemitah. But that's a very important document that has to be drafted so that they can be sure that that the money does not end up getting lost to the lender because of Shavuos. So that can be written as well. And then some other things that the Beis Din would write: igros shum, which is a court order that assesses a man's land in the event of loan non-repayment. So if the person doesn't pay back his loan, then the Beis Din are going to value the land in order to allocate some kind of financial resource to paying the person back. The igros mazon, which is a court order so that a wife or daughter can sell assets of a husband so that they can have enough food to eat. Shtari chalitza. Okay, chalitza is the alternative to yibum. We'd said that if a husband dies, leaving behind no children, then one of the remaining brothers could perform yibum and essentially marry that wife. Or they can do chalitza, which is where they agree that they're not going to get married, and there's a whole process that takes place. So that process can take place during Chol Moed, and the document can be written to prove that it has taken place. And also, Beis Din can write meunin, the documents of mi'un. What is mi'un? So historically, a father was allowed to marry off a daughter, but also historically, before the age of 12, a girl without a father could be married off by the mother or by the brothers until the age of 12. From the age of 12, when she becomes a Jewish legal adult, she has the right to refuse, and that right of refusal is called mi'un. So if that needed to be documented, that could be documented over Chol Moed. Ushtari verurin. Shtari verurin is a shtar that obligates both parties to the decisions of judges. Is that what it says on the screen there, is documents of arbitration? Yeah. Ugzeras Beis Din, any court rulings or decrees can be written down by the official court transcriber. And ve'igros shorashus, and decrees of non-Jewish government could be written down as well. Even though these things, as we said, requires a particular level of skill and professionalism and craftsmanship, which ordinarily are not permitted in Chol Moed, those things listed are allowed to be done during Chol Moed. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Daled, Ein kosfin shtari chol b'moed. you cannot write an IOU. So if a person takes a loan on Chol HaMoed, you can't write the IOU document during Chol HaMoed. Vim eino mamino, but if you don't believe that this person is going to be good for the money, or she'ein lo ma yochal, or a professional sofer, the scribe does not have enough money to pay for food, then he can write these during the week. Even if he does trust the borrower, he's allowed to write them because you're giving him money that he can then use for food. Ein kosvin sfarim. A sofer is not allowed to write a Sefer Torah or any other kind of scroll, any part of Tanakh, I guess. Tefillin, they can't write tefillin scrolls, mezuzah scrolls, bamoy. They can't write those things during Chol HaMoed. Vein magiin o sachas, they can't even correct a letter. Afilu b'Sefer Ezra, even if it's in the Sefer of Ezra, which was read in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur. Sorry, I was just making sure. Yeah, I don't know if I've Sefer Ba'azara, where's that written? I'm wondering if there's a even if it's Sefer Ezra, the scroll of Ezra, and it says on the screen there because that scroll was kept in, not because, but that scroll was kept in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Jewish communities relied on it. But yeah. So there's another version of this, is Afilu b'Sefer Ha'azara, which is the scroll that was used in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. So there was a Sefer Torah that was in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, which was read on Yom Kippur. So even if it was that one, that wouldn't be allowed to write. And then, as I said, there's another version of this, which is the Sefer Ezra, the book of Ezra, which was a Sefer Torah from the time of Ezra, which was kept in the Beis Hamikdash. So it's not the book of Ezra, it's the Sefer Torah from the time of Ezra, which was kept in the Beis Hamikdash. So apologies for getting myself confused and in a scramble over there. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's going to ultimately depend on whether it's for business use or for personal use. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Koset Adam Tefillin u'mezuzos la'atzmo. A person can write Tefillin and mezuzos for himself if it's for personal use, but not for business use. And he can also spin on his thigh the techeles strings for tzitzis. So spinning on your thigh is a very primitive method, and so it's a shinui. It's a different way of doing things than they would normally do it with their fingers. So you can do that if it's not in the ordinary manner, in the way befitting a craftsman. You can do that on Chol HaMoed. Okay, so from here until the end of the Masechta, from Mishnah Hey until the end of the Masechta, we're going to be talking about the halachot of Avedot, of mourning. And it seems that historically there were always 3 periods of time that you would progress through when it comes to mourning. There's a period of time which is the first 3 days, which is a particularly intense period of grief. Then there's Shiva, right? So from including those 3 days, but the period of Shiva, the first 7 days, which is going to be prohibited to bathe, to do laundry, to wear leather shoes, to take haircuts. And then there's the period of Shloshim, from day 7 till day 30, where haircut and certain businesses are still going to be forbidden. So those are our 3 stages. So the Mishnah says, Hakover es meso, one who buries his relative, Shlosha Yamin Kodem Larega, 3 days before a festival starts. So the Mishnah says, Batla Heimenu Gezeras Shiva. The period of Shiva and the restrictions that come along with the period of Shiva, those are going to be lifted on account of the festival. Shmona, if are we in the right place? Yeah. So if you bury a relative 8 days before a festival, then you'll get through those 3 days. You'll get through the period of Shiva, and now you're into Shloshim. So the Mishnah says, Batla Haimenu Gezeras Shloshim. The restrictions of the 30 days are going to be nullified on account of Yom Tov intersecting, and the restrictions are going to be lifted. Mipnei Sha'amru, because they said, Shabbos Ola ve'ena mafsekes. that Shabbos is going to count as a day of mourning, and it's not going to lift and interrupt the count. But regalim mafsikin ve'inan olim. But the pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, the Chagim, they are going to interrupt the count of these particular periods of time, and they're not going to continue to count. So that it cuts up those periods of time. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Have you only just signed on, by the way?
Yeah, I was a bit late.
Okay, because I was thinking to myself, wow, I've only just spotted you on the screen and we haven't had a question yet. Good evening.
Right, the question is, in this particular thing, it says, if a man buried his dead 3 days before the feast, what happens if he buries it Erev before the feast, for example?
I think it's within 3 days. I think, yes. So, yeah, I think that the Chag is going to uproot the counting. So I think the 3 days is not a case of restriction, because the restrictions of Shiva are going to apply or not apply, if that makes sense, in those 3 days as well. Yes. I think that in terms of the intensity of grief, I think historically they recognize the first 3 days as being particularly acute and particularly intense. So there's the first 3 days of which that is included in Shiva. So if you're reaching a Chag within the period of Shiva, then I believe what the Mishnah is saying is that it cuts up the restrictions of Shiva, if I'm not mistaken. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Vav, that works fine for Pesach and Sukkot because those are each 7 days long. What about Shavuos? Shavuos is only 1 day long. So the truth is that Shavuos also is going to nullify and lift the restrictions of these periods, because even though there was 1 day of Yom Tov, there was, however, a whole week of time allotted to people to be able to bring the Korban Chagigah, if I'm not mistaken, the special Korban for that festival that everyone would bring. You actually had a week to be able to bring that. It didn't have to be done on day one of Shavuos. So because of that, even though Shavuos is 1 day long, the concept of Shavuos is lasting a week means that it also nullifies this period. But the Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer says, Mishachara Beis HaMikdash, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, let's scroll down so you can have the English. So from the time that the temple was destroyed, Atzeres Keshabbos, Shavuos became like Shabbos because it was only 1 day. During the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they needed the rest of that week to be able to bring their korbanos. But after the Beis HaMikdash, then we only practiced 1 day of Shavuos, and the other 6 days did not have that same level of relevance and it was the Korban Chagigah, because they didn't need to bring, or they weren't able to bring, that Korban for the 6 subsequent days. So Rabbi Eliezer says that after the time of the Beis HaMikdash, it becomes like Shabbos. Rabban Gamliel Omer, and the ramification, by the way, of that is that Shavuos wouldn't then lift the restrictions. It would count as one of the days of Shiva or one of the days of Shloshim, and it wouldn't cut up the count. Continues the Mishnah, Rabbi Gamliel Omer, Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim k'regalim. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur function in the same way as the Shalosh Regalim, as Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Shavuos, at least in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and Sukkot. The Chachamim say, Locha divrei zeh v'locha divrei zeh. Actually, the halacha is not like either of these people. Ela atzeres k'regalim. Shavuos is still like Pesach and Sukkot, even after the Beis HaMikdash, I would assume. And Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim k'Shabbos. And according to the Chachamim, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is like Shabbos. And then we move on to Mishnah Zion, which is discussing the processes if someone was to die on Yom Tov or during Chol HaMoed. Now, it seems that there were 3 things, 3 parts to the process, 3 chiyuvim, that would take place at the time of burial. One is Kriya, which we'll be familiar with, which was when they would tear their garments. Chotzin, which I have translated in my notes as uncovering the shoulders, which was another level of public display of grief and of mourning. And then the third is Suda Savara, which we're still familiar with, which is the food that would be given to mourners by other people. So what we'll see is that on Chol Moed, that was limited to the immediate relatives only. Now on top of this, during Shiva, they would sit on the floor, and they would lay on beds on the floor like we do, sitting low, but that's not going to be the same with Chol Moed. So let's take a little look, and then we'll explain some more things as we go along. So it says the Mishnah in Mishnah Zayin, Ein Korin, we don't tear Kriya in the event of someone passing on Yom Tov or during Chol Moed, V'lo Choltzin, and we do not uncover the shoulders, remove garments from their shoulders, Ve'in Mavrin, and we do not do a Sudas Havra, we do not do this meal after the burial, Ela Krovav Shalmes, unless it is talking about the Krovim, the immediate relatives of the deceased. Ein Mavrin Ela Almita Zakufa, we only do the Suda Almita Zakufa, while sitting on an upright bed and not on a low overturned bed. So they didn't have like necessarily the shiva chairs that we had. They would literally turn over their beds and sit on the uncomfortable low side of those beds. Ve'ein molichin lebeis ha'evel, and we would not take to a house of mourning lo b'tavla. We would not take these foods in fancy dishes and baskets. So we wouldn't take it lo b'tavla, in a fancy dish or a small tray, as it translates there. V'lo be'iskutla, not in a fancy bowl. V'lo b'kanona, not in a fancy basket, which is translates there as a narrow-mouthed basket. Ela b'salim, just an ordinary basket would you be allowed to take this food in. Ve'ein omrim birkas avelim b'moed, you would not say the bracha, the mourner's blessing, during Chol Moed, which is made after the Suda. However, aval omdin bashura, you would be allowed to perform the shura and to have the rows of people standing either side. Umanachamim ufotrim esarabim, and you would be allowed to give words of consolation, and the mourners would be allowed to dismiss the consolers, the guests, by telling them, "Go home, you're done here." So that would all be, those parts at least would be allowed during Chol Moed.
Can I just interrupt? What does it mean by benedictions of the mourners?
So there was a blessing that was said at the end of the Sudas Havra, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of this first meal, which, let me see if it gives, no, it doesn't give me any more details than that. But it's a blessing or prayer that was said. I don't think it's the bracha of Hamakom Yinachem. I think that is what we talk about when we talk about consoling them. But it's equally possible that I'm mistaken. But the point is that they wouldn't do this Birkas Avelim, this bracha for the Avelim, during Chol Moed.
Right.
Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Ches, Ein manichin esamita barachov. They would not put the coffin in the Rachov, in the street, which was part of the process of encouraging people to eulogize. So the Mishnah says we don't do that, so that we don't encourage people to say eulogies. V'lo shel nashim la'olam, and we never put women out in the. I don't know necessarily that it's talking about like an open coffin. But even so, they wouldn't do this for women, because of their honor. So the next part, from here until the end of the Mishnah discusses 3 types of behavior that women would do or would perform, as it were, during mourning. So the Mishnah says, Nashim b'moed ma'anos. The women are allowed to do ma'anos. Ma'anos is some kind of lamenting through song. It says they're wailing in grief. Aval lo metapchos, but they should not clap, which is, or I've got it in my notes here as a slow morning beat. That's M-O-U-R-N, not M-O-R-N. But it seems that the women, as part of a funeral procession, had their role to play in bringing out the grief and making it an emotional and significant burial process. Rabbi Yishmael says, Hasmuchos lamita, those who are close to the coffin, metapchos, they would be allowed to do this slow morning beat. There's another part of the process which I didn't mention in the Mishnah, which is kinot. We're familiar with kinot from Tisha B'Av, but it's essentially prayers and poems and sayings, again, that would draw people into feeling the suffering and feeling the loss of the deceased. The final Mishnah, ladies and gentlemen, of Maseches Moed Katan, says the Mishnah, B'Rosh Chodashim, on Rosh Chodesh, B'Chanukah u'Vapurim, on Chanukah and Purim, Ma'anos u'Metapchos. You would be able to do these lamenting wailings, whatever it might actually be, u'Metapchos, and these beats, Bazeh u'Bazeh. You can do these. What's Bazeh u'Bazeh? So it's saying on Chol HaMoed and also Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah and Purim. No. Where am I? They can wail and clap. Bazeh u'Bazeh. Oh, they can do both of these things.
They sing and clap.
Yeah, thank you. Aval lo mekononos, but they can't do that third variety of behavior, which is the kinot, the lamentations, the poetry, the prayers, the prose of mourning. Nikbar hames, once the body is buried, lo ma'anos v'lo metapchos, then they cannot do these wailings or these beats, these beatings, these clappings. Ezehu inui. What is this inui? This concept that we've been talking about. The Mishnah says, Shekulan olos ke'echas, that they all answer after her. So she would say something, and then they would all answer after her. Kina. What is a kina? Sha'achas medaberes. One person would say something. Vechulan onos achareha, and then everybody would answer a refrain of some kind after her. Shneimar, as it says in the book of Jeremiah, V'lamedna b'noseichen nehi. The verse says that and teach your daughters wailing, v'isha ru'usa kina, and everyone and teach her neighbor lamentations. So the idea is that you would teach your daughters to mourn. So everyone would be able to do this inui, but one woman would teach the kinot, and she would kind of lead it, and everyone would respond. And finally, our Mishnah and our Maseches finishes off with something a bit more positive, so that we don't finish on a bit of a downer. And the Mishnah finishes off, Aval le'asil lavo hu omer. But don't worry, in the future, Jeremiah says, and we all know this from attending too many shiva houses, Bila hamaves lanetzach u'macha Adonai Elohim dima mial kol panim. So the verse says in Isaiah, in Yeshaya, he will destroy death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces. And this is talking about the end of days, the messianic time. So why on earth do we not want the Mashiach to come? Because if he comes, then death ends, and everyone will not suffer any more loss, and there won't be any more death, and there won't be any more coronavirus, and the world will be a much better place. So come on, guys, let's all do what we can to bring Mashiach. And with that, join me as we say, Nishlama Maseches Moed Katan, Nishlama Maseches Moed Katan, Nishlama Maseches Moed Katan. Mazel tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing Moed Katan. And that is all we have time for tonight on our Mishnah Mastery. We will continue next week with the exciting world of Maseches Chagigah. Shkoyach, everybody. We wish you a wonderful and meaningful night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good
Right. Thank you very much.
night. Thank you.